I don't know how many we might have out in the foyer, but I'm just going to go ahead and get started here. We do want to let you go in a timely manner this evening so you can make your way home and get rested and come back and be with us in the morning. I want to remind you once again that Bill and I will be presenting in the morning and John and I presenting tomorrow night, all three of us on Sunday morning. And then Sunday night, the Q&A period. Again, write down your questions that you want included in the Q&A, and we'll get all our electronics figured out. This is nothing new. It seems like every time we go to a new venue, whether it's Bill and John and I or others, you end up having to deal with different things in the electronics because they're changing the electronics faster than anybody can keep up with. That's part of it. I got a brand new laptop here, and believe me, I know the travail of having a new laptop. Of course, you know what you do with a laptop that doesn't work. I walked right into that, so I won't even finish that joke. I'll wait till tomorrow. And I'll be praying for my friend John. Of course, he's driving tonight, so I can be nice to him until we get back to the hotel. At any rate, I love these guys. I appreciate their heart heart for research and for the truths that they present. We're all on the same team and trying to warn the church about not only where we are in time and the day that we live in, but also about what is happening around us. And the old terms, the old phrases, they don't always apply anymore. You'd like to think that when somebody calls himself an evangelical, they really are. But I've been telling people now for about 5 years that I only use the word evangelical in particular circumstance when I know everybody there understands what I mean when I say it, because today it's had so many different, completely wrong or different definitions put to it. And today when you use that word, it doesn't mean what it used to mean. It used to mean, I believe the Bible. That doesn't mean that anymore, as we're going to talk about in one of the sessions tomorrow. I'll be talking about it. At any rate, my friend Bill Salus is a well-known author. God gave him a voice with these type of messages you're going to hear that he'll bring this weekend, just for the day that we live in. You know, there are things that we see in the Scripture that, unless we dig into the background of it, maybe we won't understand the whole implication of it. Bill's dug into the background of a couple of scriptures, one in particular, Psalm 83, and seen some things by looking at the history of who the people were being talked about there, that honestly, when I heard Bill talk about it the first time, it absolutely convinced me of the view that Bill is going to share on that, and I think that's what you're doing this evening, isn't it, brother? Yeah. And so would you come and would you give Bill Salus a hand all the way from California?
Thank you, Brother Eric. It's great to be here from sunny Southern California. I had the air conditioning on in my office the day before I flew over here. It never rains in Southern California. Could I get a little more treble on this microphone? More mids. Turn this one off, please. Great. Can you all hear me out there okay? Great. Well, it's great to be here at the Bible Prophecy Conference. You know, the Bible, one of the central themes about the Bible is that there is a latter days and end times, or latter years. Daniel says, the book of Daniel, the time of the end, or end of time. How many of you think we might be living in the end of time? You know, it's clear that the Bible talks about an expiration date on this present Earth's timeline. What we're about to talk about, the group of gentlemen here today, that you're going to see we're pretty well deep within the end times. And the number one sign that we're living deep within the end times, as John was saying, is that all the signs are converging, not one, not two. The apostasy of the church, the Middle East prophecies I'll be talking about, things like that. So we live in very, very interesting times. It's a great time to be alive if you believe in Jesus Christ and you have the assurance of your salvation. But it's a frightening time if you don't. And if you don't know Jesus Christ here tonight, remember the whole central theme about this conference is that you would come to know Jesus Christ. You recognize that there is a Savior. There's a God who knows the end from the beginning, who loves us, who sent His Son to die for us. And that's really the central theme of why we're all here, why we make these trips. Okay? Before I start talking on my lesson tonight, I'll introduce you to a little bit of my resources that I brought with me. I've got a few books I've written. The first one you see up there on the left is called Revelation Road. And that was my attempt to paint the end-time story into a picture, into a novel. The first part of it is a novel, and the second part, it's actually two books in one, is a commentary talking about the prophecies in the novel. It's book one of a trilogy, and it's dealing with some grandparents who think their grandchild has been birthed in the final generation. So I'm trying to sequence the prophecies between now and the second coming of Christ as best we can understand them. Book 2 comes out this year called Apocalypse Road. That's Revelation Road. It's 2 books in one. The book I'll be teaching from tonight is Psalm 83, The Missing Prophecy Revealed, which came out in 2013, and got the prophetic community very interested in what is Psalm 83 about, and I'll be explaining that to you. My latest book that was just featured on TBN Monday night is Nuclear Showdown in Iran, Revealing the Ancient Prophecy of Elam, a vastly overlooked Bible prophecy. Try to figure out how to get this thing to change here. Oh, there we go. Okay. Jeremiah 49, verses 34 through 39 deals with this prophecy, and this will be my topic tomorrow morning. You know, if you're watching the news, Iran's nuclear program is really the elephant in the room in the Middle East. ISIS is very troubling. We're very concerned about that. But when Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu came over on March 3rd and spoke to joint houses of Congress, he didn't talk about ISIS, and he didn't talk about the Palestinian-Israeli peace talks. He talked about one thing, and that's Iran's nuclear program. And I believe that there's a prophecy written in 596 BC by Jeremiah that was for our time that may be dealing with that very issue. So you're going to want to come here. I think I speak first tomorrow morning, and that will be my topic. I wanted to take a moment just to tell you about the TBN show that Pastor talked about. It was on this past Monday night on the Praise the Lord show. It's the largest watched Christian television show in the world. Millions watched this program. Featured Rabbi Jonathan Kahn, Mark Biltz, and myself. It was hosted by Perry Stone. It was really a great show. I've been on many of the shows with these gentlemen. We all agreed it was the best one we've done. Jonathan talked about what's something called the Shemitah. How many of you ever heard about the Shemitah? Okay. It's in God's economy with the Hebrews and the Israelis, he would have a 7-year period, and it would culminate with the 29th of Elul on their Hebrew calendar. That was the end of their Shemitah period, and that Shemitah means release. And after 7 years, the cycle would complete and go again, and there would be a release of the land and the debt and things like that. So Jonathan talked about that, and he talked about how we have another Shemitah cycle, how it applies not only to ancient Israel, but probably applies to even the Gentile nations of today, even America. He gets so deep into talking about recent Shemitahs, and for instance, I'll give you 2 of the last ones he talked about on the program. He talked about in September of 2008, on September 29th, which was the last 7-year cycle, the stock market in America had its worst decline ever. 777 points it dropped. Interesting, it was 777. God deals in numerical cycles and stuff like that. The Shemitah before that, 7 years before, after 9/11, on September of 2011, was on September 17th, just 6 days after. And the stock market at that time had its sharpest decline in history up to that point. It fell 686 points. Jonathan's concerned that something may be happening, a shaking may be coming upon the earth here real soon, especially to this country. And that's when Mark Biltz starts talking in the program. They roll over to him, and he starts talking about these blood moons. So we had the Shemitah that Jonathan spoke about, and then Mark Biltz starts talking about these blood moons. And the thing that's important about the blood moons, if they're significant, and I think Mark puts together a good point, is that they're full lunar eclipses, but when they fall in the sequence of 4 on the feast days of Israel, which would be Passover and Tabernacles, and Passover and Tabernacles again, and that's what they're doing right now in 2014 and 2015. We got 2 more coming up on April 4th and on September 28th. April 4th would be Passover, and April 28th would be Tabernacles. So, September 28th. So by the time they got to me, after having Jonathan and Mark Biltz talk, everybody was at the edge of their seat, to say the least. And they wanted me to kind of put together, well, what could this mean? What could this shaking be? Mark Biltz is concerned about perhaps an economic collapse. He's also watching for Psalm 83, which I'll be talking about. So I encourage you to watch that show. It's actually on my internet site, and it's on the TBN internet site. They post the shows after they air on their internet site. And presently, it's on pace to be the most watched ever in the history of TBN's internet viewings. That's how good the show was. And they're going to air it again on March 25th. I would highly encourage you to watch it. So the point being, What I shared with the audience of TBN was what I think we should be watching for, which could cause these types of things, if indeed this, what Mark and Jonathan are talking about, is significant. And it creates a sense of urgency for 2015, because this is the end of the Shemitah cycle. Jonathan Cahn has written a book called The Harbinger. It sold over 2 million copies. And he's been trying to warn about things that happened to the ancient northern kingdom of Israel before it was destroyed. You're seeing those same types of things, warnings applying to America right now. So he gets into that quite heavily, and I think we need to be very concerned about some of the things he's saying. So I'll be talking about Psalm 83 tonight. Outside on the resource table, it comes with a DVD as well. My topic will be Psalm 83 or Ezekiel 38, which is the next Middle East news headline. I think we're going to be looking at the fulfillment of a Bible prophecy in the very near future, and maybe a sequence of them. And it's exciting, but I think at this point we're talking about literal fulfillments of Bible prophecies that will be forthcoming, maybe even as soon as this year. There's a couple other lessons on that. I'll either be teaching on one of these two on Sunday morning, either the roots of the Middle East conflict, how come it's so bizarre over there, it's an ancient spiritual hatred that's embellished in Islam right now, or I might talk about America. We'll see what I feel the Lord wants on Sunday. So tonight, we're going to talk about these coming biblical wars, the War of Edom, which will be in Psalm 83, the Edomites, or the Gog and Magog invasion in Ezekiel 38. We'll talk about both of those. I'm going to sequence them. I'm going to tell you why I think one comes before the other and give you my reasons for that. And they're not the same prophecy. I'll show you the distinctions between them. Quick question. How many of you feel somewhat familiar with Ezekiel 38, that Russian-led invasion that comes to invade Israel in Ezekiel 38 called the Gog and Magog invasion? Okay, we've got probably about a quarter of the room. How about Ezekiel 38? Psalm 83, the same question. How many of you become somewhat familiar with Psalm 83, that concluding Arab-Israeli war? Okay, even less. And that's not surprising, because Ezekiel 38 is a very descriptive prophecy. It's been taught quite a bit from the pulpits and Bible teachers, but Psalm 83 has been more recently brought into the mainstream understanding. Psalm 83, briefly, and we'll go into it. We'll go verse by verse in the study. Psalm 83 is a concluding Arab-Israeli war. Asaph, when he wrote the psalm, wrote about Edomites and Ammonites, etc. But here's how they would be on a modern-day map if this is a prophecy for our time. And you see it includes the Arab states that share common borders with Israel. And inside of those Arab states, now you have terrorist populations that have burgeoned out, like Hezbollah and the Palestinians, the Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, and of course you'd, at this point, probably have to throw ISIS into the mix. If they go unchecked, I'm going to show you a verse in Psalm 83 that might actually allude to ISIS. So we'll see if that's pertinent. We are very careful when we teach these things, John and Eric and I, to not create what we call newspaper exegesis. That's where you take current events and try to marry them up with the scriptures to try to make a point. You have to stay inside of the text of the prophecy and the details of the prophecy to avoid that. But since this prophecy is staring us in the face right now, it could be that ISIS has a major role within it. So when I write about Psalm 83, I call the Arab states and terrorist populations within them an inner circle. They're an inner circle around Israel. They have Israel surrounded. And you can see a little map up here of their ancient names: Ammonites, Moabites, Edomites. There's some gigabytes and megabytes in there as well. And but you see them superimposed over Egypt and Saudi Arabia and those other Arab states that I just showed you. In contrast with Ezekiel 38, we have what I call an outer ring. I want you to notice that they are not inside of the inner circle. None of the Ezekiel 38 invaders that I'll be pointing out to you have anything to do with Psalm 83. They are all across the borders. They're in North Africa. They're over, you got Iran over there and ancient Persia. I'm going to show you another map in just a minute, but this map is good to show you the distinction between the inner circle of Psalm 83 and the outer ring of this other invasion. Folks, these are two epic biblical wars in the Middle East that will make all the other wars you've seen in modernity, the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, 67, 73 wars, the Hezbollah conflicts, the Hamas conflicts, those will look like crosstown sporting rivalries compared to these wars when they come, and they will affect the world and they will affect Americans. and they do seem to be coming very near. So Ezekiel 38, here's another map of it. You see those arrows pointing down toward Israel? You know, there was Magog and Meshech and Tubal. Remember when these guys wrote, they did not have Russia and Jordan and Iran, and they had different names, so we have to determine from the vocabulary of their time who might they be talking about now. And that's why maps are very important for you to get a look at, to get an overall composite feel of what you got over there. So the general consensus is that your Magog invaders, there's 9 altogether, they're led by Russia, would include this list over here on the left, which would be Turkey and Iran and Ethiopia, Sudan, Algeria, Morocco, some of the northern African countries. There's a general look of who they are. Now this prophecy, many people believe, is coming really, really soon, and I'm going to show you some of the reasons why they believe that. But is it next? That's the question. Are all the details prepared to happen for this invasion to occur? Now, as you looked at those different maps up there, we had the inner circle, we have the outer ring. Now, specifically, I'm going to ask you a few questions on the next slide. Look at, we got Russia here, and all these arrows are going to come toward little Israel. That's where those arrows are pointing. Israel's about the size of New Jersey. It's a really, seems like a big overkill when you think about it, because basically Russia has over 8,000 nuclear weapons. You would think Russia would probably be able to handle Israel by itself. Why do they need to invite all these big friends into their coalition, like Turkey? Turkey's army is in the top 10. Iran's got a powerful army as well. Why do they need all these big friends? It would be like President Obama saying, New Jersey's given us a problem. They're giving us a fit on the Obamacare. We need to get Canada, Mexico, and the United States to come against little New Jersey. It seems ridiculous, doesn't it? We wouldn't need to do that, right? So I'm going to give you that example as I conclude. So we're going to ask these questions. Why does Russia need so many big friends to come against little tiny Israel? And then we're going to ask, why do they have different coalitions? Remember, there's an inner circle that has Israel surrounded, and then there's an outer ring, making distinctions here. There's different coalitions entirely. Why do they have different agendas? Psalm 83, you're going to see that they're coming against Israel to take over Israel, to take the land of Israel. They want another Arab state. Russia's different. Russia's going to come. I'll show you their motive is to take plunder and booty. In other words, they want the material wealth, the livelihood of Israel's economy. So we have different agendas. And then they have different defeats as well. I'll show you that the Psalm 83 war is concluded by the Israeli Defense Forces. They exist today in fulfillment of Bible prophecy. The other defeat, that would be for Psalm 83. Ezekiel 38, it is stopped by the Lord. It says with fire, hailstone, and brimstone. So it's not the Israeli Defense Forces. So we got differences here. Again, these are not the same prophecies. Some people kind of blur them together. I think that's a clumsy error. So why do we think Ezekiel 38 is pretty near? Well, I'll give you a few reasons right now. Vladimir Putin, raised in the ranks of the KGB, has made statements that the Russian president, statements that the greatest tragedy of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Empire. The greatest triumph of the 21st century would be the revival, the reinstatement of the Soviet Empire. Russia took over Crimea in March of 2014 with hardly firing a shot. That's about 5 times the land mass that the Palestinians have been trying to get over the last 66 years. So amazing how Russia's on the move right now. Russia is the lead country in the Ezekiel 38 war, and we're seeing Russia emerging again, trying to reemerge as a superpower back in their glory days of the Soviet Union. And of course the Ukraine, there's concerns that they're going to want to move into the Ukraine next. So lots of concerns about that. Russia provides about 25% of the natural gas to Europe, and 80% of those gas lines go through Ukraine. It's a very pivotal country for Russia's economy. Russia provides all of Ukraine's natural gas to them. So Russia is on the move right now. They're reemerging. This is one of the concerns. This appears to be indicating that Ezekiel 38 is in the mix here, coming up real soon. Just a quick note that the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, will be the president until 2018, which means when these blood moons come this year, if they're significant, he will be the president, barring any unforeseen circumstances. Now, there's a rumor going on, I don't know if you heard about it, but some people think he might have died here today. There's recent assassinations of a strong opposition leader a few days back. No, I don't believe he's dead, but we'll have to keep an eye on that. And he may not be the leader at the time of what they call Gog and Magog, but just so you know, if he is alive and something does not happen, he will be the president during the next the final 2 blood moons coming up this year. We also have another president, barring any unforeseen circumstances, of America who will be the president during the blood moons. That's Barack Obama. Now, some of us are a little concerned because he'll be the president until 2016. Some of us are concerned his foreign policy is becoming to resemble pretty much that of Jimmy Carter's, which was sort of a, can't we all get along and lead from behind? And that's when you had the 52 hostages during the Iranian hostage crisis in 1979. They were hostages for 444 days, and Jimmy Carter couldn't really do anything to get them released. It was a very weak foreign policy, so some of us are a little concerned during the blood moons. What we might get in Washington would be something like this. Heaven forbid. I know some of you think, well, that's just Tiger Woods, but so we have another concern showing the urgency of Ezekiel 38 and 39. Remember, Iran's involved, and Russia and Iran have never had stronger national relationships than they do right now. I'll be talking more about that when I talk about Iran's nuclear program tomorrow, but they're involved in contracts with Iran's nuclear program. They helped them build 1 facility, and they've got contracts to build 2 more. We're also concerned about Iran. They hate Israel, and Iran's going to be involved in this major attack against Israel. The Ayatollah, here's a quote from WorldNet Daily back in February of 2012. Iran lays out a legal case for the genocidal attack, and they call Israel a cancerous tumor. I'll give you more venomous quotes tomorrow when I talk about this, but you can see all these indicators are pointing toward the nearness of Ezekiel 38. Turkey's involved, and Turkey has come out against Israel. There was an episode called the Mavi Marmara, where there was a flotilla that Turkey wants Israel to apologize for because it was humanitarian aid supposedly going to the Hamas, and it was a big episode some of you may remember. But at that point, a turning point came between Turkey's relationship and Israel. Plus, Russia and Turkey have very strong relationships now as well. About 58 to 60% of Turkey's natural gas comes from Russia. And Turkey has recently, in May 2010, signed a $20 billion project with Moscow to build a nuclear facility in Ankara, Turkey, which is to be done by 2023. So Russia and Turkey's alliances have never been greater as well. All these things strongly indicate that Ezekiel 38 and 39 is coming real soon. So we get into the prophecy in Ezekiel 38, verse 10, and we find out that this Russian leader, we call him Gog. Gog would be the title like Caesar or Tsar or Kaiser. He would be the leader, an individual with a title, president if you want, something like that. And we find out he forms an evil plan in verse 10. It says, on that day it shall come to pass that thoughts will arise in your mind to this Russian leader, if it's Vladimir Putin, and we're not saying it is, especially if he's dead. Have to be someone else. And he goes on to give us some details. Now, Ezekiel 38 and 39 have enormous amount of details. 52 verses tells us so much about the prophecy. When you read that prophecy, you come out with some basic knowledge, even if you don't understand Bible prophecy at all. That's how detailed it is. They're going to go up against the land of unwalled villages. There'll be a peaceful people that are dwelling safely without walls, and they're coming to take plunder and to take booty and to stretch out their hand against the waste places that are again inhabited, against a people regathered from the nations. And we find out that that's dealing with Israel presently, who's been regathered from the nations, who have acquired livestock and goods, who dwell in the midst of the land. So Russia's going to come together at a certain time under certain conditions. We find out that this is in the latter days from other verses. So in the end times, this is going to happen. There's that map again, and if you notice, one of the things that's interesting, they're coming against Israel in the end times for their livelihood, their plunder and their booty. And if you take a close look, it's interesting that the coalition Russia puts together is in a position where they can actually block off Israel's ability to conduct any international commerce. You would have Iran could block off the Persian Gulf. You could have Turkey would block off the northern part of the Mediterranean Sea. You would have Libya could block off the southern part of the Mediterranean Sea. The East African countries over there could block off commerce through the Red Sea. and then the other countries could block off anything that got through as it started to go through the Strait of Gibraltar. Now, I just find that interesting. Israel's going to have commerce. We're going to find out in the next verse, are people interested in that commerce, apart from Russia trying to take it with its coalition. And this seems to be somewhat strategic. As they can block off Israel's ability to export their wealth into the world markets. We get this other interesting clue. We have these groups that say, Sheba and Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish and their young lions will say to you, speaking to Russia here in its coalition, have you come to take plunder? Have you gathered your army to take booty, to carry away silver and gold, to take away livestock and goods, to take great plunder? So here we have more details, again, that the motive is for this plunder, this booty that Israel, it's going to be a very, very wealthy Israel. And Russia's going to put this big coalition together. So we have Russia and its members of 9 coalition. We have Israel, the victim of this attack. But here we have these other 4 populations listed. So we have to take a look at them. And I'll tell you, I think that perhaps America is where you would find American Bible prophecy here. Now, these countries are not fighting with Russia, fortunately, but they're not defending Israel. They're protesting, saying, what are you doing, Russia? You're coming for plunder and booty. Now, it's the merchants of Tarshish. It's not the athletes or the entertainers or the politicians of Tarshish. It's the merchants of Tarshish. So it's a theme of commerce and merchandise. I'm going to explain that in a minute, and I'll tell you who Tarshish should be. Sheba and Dedan. Sheba would be Yemen. You see the arrow up there? And Dedan would be Saudi Arabia, northern Saudi Arabia. But who are the merchants of Tarshish and their young lions? Who is it that wants to have commerce with Israel and the colonies that came out from that entity of Tarshish? Now, your 2 main thoughts of Tarshish would be that Tarshish would be Spain, and the colonies that came out of Spain would be, the Latino areas, South America and Central America. If you study that argument closely, it's got a lot of holes in it. I'll let you do your own studies. I have discounted that argument. That doesn't make any sense to me after I've studied it. When people talk about Tarshish, some archaeologists believe that Tarshish is the ancient name for Britain. And I get into one of my DVDs, I'll show you the cover in just a minute, and I explain all the reasons why it probably represents America in this passage. So that's the other argument. Tarshish would be the UK. And out from the UK, you had some colonies there, and of course you had Canada and the United States. And I believe, folks, that's where we are here. Now, the sad news is, if that's us, why are we not fighting alongside Israel? Why are we simply saying, well, what are you doing, Russia? But the central theme here, what happens to America at that point in time? Are we still the same superpower that we are presently? Many of us are concerned about that very verse right there. But the theme, of course, is someone wants to be having commerce with Israel. Merchants, they want to be doing business with this lively, robust economy of Israel. And they're saying, Russia, what are you doing? We want commerce with them. You're coming to take that away. That's the central theme here. One other thing about America's potential for being right there, J.R. Church, the founder of Prophecy in the News, he's since passed away. He wrote in his book, The Guardians of the Grail, an inscription discovered in 1780 on a cliff above Mount Hope Bay in Bristol, Rhode Island, contained an engraving that read, Voyagers from Tarshish, this stone proclaims. It's believed to be inscribed around 533 B.C. Harvard University has found 5 locations within the United States where the merchants of Tarshish had colonies. Remember the young lions, the young colonies, okay? Just one of the arguments for America in Bible prophecy right there, but in a weakened condition. Protesters, not defending Israel, not coming to Israel's side. And the DVD that's out on my resource table comes out from the Psalm 83 book. It's got 2 lessons in it. And what is America's role in the coming Mideast wars? Now, that may be my topic on Sunday. I'm not sure yet. And then the other one is in there is the future for Israel, Iran, and the Arab states. So that DVD will tell you the arguments for America in Bible prophecy. So, quick review. Ezekiel 38 is very near. You're seeing the national relationships developing around you. You're watching it on the news. Those descriptions that we were told that Russia will come against this type of an Israel, we have to look at them very closely. Does that Israel exist right now? Is it regathered from the nations? Is it in the latter years? Has it been brought back from persecution, from the sword? Is it into an area that had long been desolate? Of course, Israel was desolate for 1,878 years until 1948. And then it started to be repopulated. Now it's very robust over there. And do they dwell in the midst of the center of a land that had long been desolate? Well, the land in question is the land God gave to Abraham. which goes from the river of Egypt, the Nile, to the river Euphrates, which goes through Iraq and Syria, and Israel is sort of in the midst of that. So I would say it's safe to give some check marks to those aspects of the prophecy. Wow, it looks like the prophecy could be getting very near. Look at that. Important ingredients. But is it next? Are these things also in play right now? Is Israel a peaceful people dwelling securely? Now, I think they would say no. I'll give you some reasons for that. Are they dwelling without walls, bars, nor gates? Those are other descriptions we were given in what I read you. Have they got all this wealth, acquired this livestock? Are they that great wealthy nation possessing such great booty and plunder? Although they're economically very sound right now, are they the Israel of wealth that this calls for, where Russia would bring together such a formidable coalition to come after Israel's wealth? And I think the answers to those questions need to be looked at a little more closely. For instance, are they dwelling without walls, bars, nor gates? Well, if you look at the prophecy literally, and I like to look at prophecies literally when you can, no, they're not. They have a 403-mile wall. It's called a partition wall that was established to keep Palestinian terror out of Israel proper. And in some places, it's 20 feet high of concrete. Now, there's some security fence at other parts, but they're not dwelling without walls, bars, nor gates. They have security checkpoints throughout as well. So that's not true at this point of Israel. Are they dwelling securely without walls, bars, nor gates? The Hebrew word is yeshav, used there, and it's used twice in verse 8 and verse 11 of Ezekiel 38. They've been brought out of the nations, they dwell safely, and they're peaceful people who dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, bars, nor gates. The word, when you look at it biblically, it speaks of a security that is accomplished militarily. In other words, you have defeated your enemy, now you can dwell securely. Is Israel dwelling securely presently? Now let's be honest. They've got ISIS bearing down on them from Syria and Iraq. They've got Hezbollah has 100,000 missiles to the north of them. Iran's got a nuclear weapon, working toward a nuclear weapon, and has vowed to wipe Israel off the map. Hamas lobbed 3,000 missiles into Israel this past summer. I think it's a far cry to think that they're dwelling securely presently. We find out when Israel will dwell securely. Ezekiel actually gives us that insight 10 chapters earlier in Ezekiel 28. And what he tells us there, when Israel will dwell securely. And he says, when I have gathered the house of Israel from the peoples among whom they are scattered, which is going on right now, folks. This is a major miracle that God's doing, bringing Jews into the land of Israel. And I'm going to be hallowed in the sight of the Gentiles, and they will dwell in their own land, which I gave to my servant Jacob, and they will dwell safely there. That's the same Hebrew words, yeshav v'tach. They will build houses and plant vineyards. Yes, they will dwell securely, yeshav v'tach. So we see this is when they're going to dwell securely. But when? When I execute judgments on all those around them who despise them, then they shall know that I am the Lord their God. Israel will not dwell securely until judgments are executed around those who despise them. Are there people around Israel today who despise Israel? Well, every Arab state and terrorist population that surrounds Israel that I showed you a map on in Psalm 83, they do not recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. In fact, the entire 58 members of the Arab League do not recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. So they do have people around them who despise them. Here they are, and I'm going to go over Psalm 83 by their ancient names. Like I said, Ammonites and Moabites and Edomites, etc. That's their ancient names. Now, they're not in Ezekiel 38 on the map I showed you. Was Ezekiel not familiar with them? See, that's the question we have to have. He is familiar with every one of those ancient names you just saw. He lists them over 89 times in his 48 chapters, but he doesn't list them once in Ezekiel 38. Now, why is that? It's because, in my estimation, they're not involved. They're involved in Psalm 83. Here they are today on a modern-day map. They're the reason, Israel's enemies that despise Israel, they're the reason Israel cannot dwell securely. So, although Ezekiel 38 is coming real soon, and folks, that's a major prophecy. That's a major event. When you see that happening, you can count on being affected in America. So let's talk about Psalm 83, the concluding Arab-Israeli war, different than Ezekiel 38. It's interesting, in 2006, in the summer of 2006, an Irish construction worker was doing a construction project in Ireland in this muddy bog soil, and that's very muddy, treacherous soil. And it wasn't an archaeological dig. He had his bulldozers, and he was getting ready for this project, and he had to bring it to a stop because these antiquities he found had been buried for about 1,200 years. There was about 22 manuscripts of the Psalms there, and he had to bring his work to a halt. They were written in Latin, and it turns out, you'd see the headlines coming out at this time. It was in July of 2006. Associated Press said an ancient book of Psalms is found in an Irish bog. National Geographic said medieval Christian book discovered in an Ireland bog. It was heralded as the Irish Dead Sea Scroll discovery back at the time. Did any of you remember hearing about this at all? A couple of you, yeah. And so it was quite an amazing find. And so they've got these Psalms in a museum in Ireland. Unfortunately, they're pretty much all damaged beyond repair, except one of them. And can you imagine which psalm was opened in place and unblemished after 1,200 years? It should have been destroyed in the muddy soil, should have been destroyed by the bulldozer. It was not a toothbrush's archaeological dig. Who's going to make a guess? Maybe it was Psalm 83? It was Psalm 83. Very interesting. Now, at the same time that they found that psalm in a bog, there was other headlines emanating across in the Middle East. And one of them was the Washington Post. Israel mourns, Hezbollah exalts, and Israel intensify ground conflict in Hezbollah in Lebanon. WorldNet Daily said Psalm in a bog linked to Israel's current war. So what was going on there is at the time of this discovery, it was right in the middle of a 34-day conflict in the summer of 2006 between Hezbollah to the north and Israel. And they lobbed about 4,000 missiles into northern Israel. They put most of the Israelis in the northern Israel into bomb shelters for the 34-day period, about a month. And in the middle of that is when this psalm is found. Now, I find that coincidental, perhaps providential, because when you study Bible prophecy, you'll realize that out of the 31,173 verses in the Bible, the 1,189 chapters in the Bible, and the 150 psalms in the Bible, there's only one place you're going to find any resemblance in a conflict of Israel and Hezbollah under the inhabitants of Tyre, T-Y-R-E. And that's in Psalm 83. Interesting. At the same time, I was writing my first book on Psalm 83 called Israelistine. So we had these things going on. And I think the Lord at that point was trying to make mention of the fact, get ready for Psalm 83, folks. It's a very important situation. Now, Tyre and Israel had good relationships at various points in their histories, but here's the one place out of all those verses where you're going to find them represented in a conflict, and that's in Psalm 83. Just an interesting note to preface the study on Psalm 83. Now, Asaph, he wrote Psalm 83. He wrote 12 psalms. You see a list of which ones he wrote up there. He was a worship leader for David. And Psalm 83 is the most prophetic of all the psalms. We also find out in 2 Chronicles 29:30 that Asaph was a prophet. We're told that he was a seer. Hezekiah and the leaders commanded the Levites to sing praise to the Lord with the words of David and of Asaph the seer. Hebrew word is for prophet. Kozah, beholder of vision, and it means a prophet. So we find out that he was a prophet, and he wrote prophetic psalms, especially Psalm 83. I'm going to go through the verses a little bit. You can open your Bibles, but I will have them up on the screen. He says, do not keep silent, O God, do not hold your peace, and do not be still, O God. For behold, your enemies make a tumult, and those who hate you have lifted up their head. They have taken crafty counsel against your people and consulted together against your sheltered ones. They have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more, for they have consulted together with one consent. They form a confederacy against you. So what's being said there, in a nutshell, is that Asaph is saying, God, don't be silent about this major assault to destroy the nation of Israel. And by the way, folks, God is not being silent right now. You're hearing about it. Millions of people heard it on TBN just on Monday. I've been on TBN probably about 7 times and talked about this psalm. So millions of people have heard about this. Hal Lindsey's teaching it. Chuck Missler's teaching it. Many, many prophecy teachers are teaching it over the last 5 or 6 years since I came out with my books on it. He's not keeping silent about it. He's answering that part of the prophecy. But Israel has these enemies, and these enemies are going to make a tumult. They're going to create a disturbance. and they've lifted up their head, they've exalted themselves. And they're going to take crafty counsel together. They're going to form a confederacy. They're going to form a devious plan. And their goal is they want to destroy the nation of Israel. They want to cut the nation of Israel off, that the name of Israel can be remembered no more. They want to banish Israel once and for all, which means there has to be an Israel, right? If you're going to destroy an Israel, there has to be an Israel. Is there an Israel today? Of course there is. Was there an Israel between 70 AD and 1948 AD? No, there was not. So it couldn't have happened for 1,878 years there. And I show in my book that it didn't happen in the past, in the Old Testament. So it means it has to happen when there's an Israel now, and I believe it's becoming very near, and I think it will precede Ezekiel 38. Remember, when the enemies around Israel are judged that despise Israel. They are in Psalm 83. So they come together and they form a confederacy. So we're not talking about a chronological ordering of Israel's enemies. We're talking about a contemporary alignment, a confederacy. And these are the countries that came against Israel when it became a nation in 1948. So we're going to find out who these belligerents are in verses 6 through 8 by the ancient vernacular of their names. And the very first one listed is the tents of Edom. And I'll tell you why that's important in just a minute. And he goes on and talks about these Ishmaelites and the Moabites and the Hagarenes and Gebal and Ammon, 10 of them listed all together. Amalek, Philistia, inhabitants of Tyre, we talked about them. Perhaps that represents Lebanon and Hezbollah. But I have highlighted also another thing. Assyria has joined with them. They have helped the children of Lot. And I'm going to show you in a map in a minute where that may be dealing with ISIS. Now, I don't want to sensationalize that, but that particular entity has a specific function in this prophecy. They're going to join with Jordan. That's the children of Lot. And they're going to help them. Now, among the Psalm 83 countries, the weakest country militarily, when you add ISIS into the mix or Hezbollah into Lebanon, is Jordan. Their military is only for defensive purposes to protect King Abdullah, the Hashemite kingdom. And so they are the weakest army by far of the Psalm 83 mix, and they will need help to fight in a major war. And then we find out their goal in verse 12 is they want to take for themselves the pastures of God for a possession. They want to take over the promised land. So remember, different than Ezekiel 38, plunder and booty, here we see that they want the land, the pastures of God for themselves as a possession. Now the tents of Edom are listed first, and they're listed in a habitation condition, tents of. Now whenever you have some entity, tribe in this case, listed first, among the other 9, there's 10 altogether populations, that usually is significant. It's like when you watch a movie and the credits come at the end and it's got the star of the show and then the supporting actors come down after that. Their plight is being bannered here. And their plight is being bannered when they're dwelling in a tense of condition. And that would typically represent biblically refugee conditions. So I believe it's dealing with the Palestinian refugees. And in my book, I point out that the Palestinian refugees today have ethnical representation in them from the Edomites, the ancient Edomites. And I give you the whole chronology of how you can find that out inside of the book. So I think what he's saying there is when you see the Palestinian refugees, get ready, this prophecy is about to happen. And do we see the Palestinian refugees? Yes, we do. And we're going to talk about them in just a moment. We showed you this map earlier. There's all those names again, Gebal and Tyre and the tents of Edom. That's the Psalm 83 country. There's those countries around Israel, why Israel can't dwell securely, that despise Israel. The judgments will need to be executed upon them. The tents of Edom, there's a picture of the Palestinian refugees in 1949 up there. Here's who they are today, of course. They're no longer living in tents, but they're armed and dangerous. That's a picture of Hamas. They are part of the Palestinian refugees. So are the Palestinian Authority. You've also got Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, Jordan. And there's about 4 million of them scattered throughout the various countries in these refugee camps. Been there for about 66 years, and they're very upset with Israel, and they want the land of Israel. They want another state. So I talked about Assyria. Now when Asaph wrote and included Assyria 3,000 years ago, this map you see up here is that was what ancient Assyria looked like 3,000 years ago in Psalm 83. And you see that it covers northern Syria and northern Iraq. Now presently that's the land, the swaths of territory that ISIS now controls. Okay, just maybe I'm making more out of this than we should, but just so you know, they are now in control of what was once called ancient Assyria. Now Assyria expanded between 740 and 701 BC when Isaiah was prophesying. They conquered Damascus and they conquered the northern kingdom of Israel, and they took over what would all be part of Syria today, where Damascus is and stuff. But at the time he wrote, this is what Assyria looked like. Now it's interesting, it says that they will help the children of Lot in verse 8. It will join with them and help them. Now, King of Jordan right now is very concerned about ISIS. He's very concerned that Jordan will be the next major land grab, and he is warning everybody to help protect and be ready for this situation. Now, if they do take over Jordan, and that's where the children of Lot are, would be Ammon and Moab, and they're in Psalm 83, they would then have de facto control over the Temple Mount. And if you guys are watching things in Israel right now in Jerusalem, you know, that ultimately in Bible prophecy, we'll know there's going to be another temple, a tribulation temple. The Antichrist is going to go into that temple in the tribulation period. And he's going to violate it. He's going to abominate it. Jesus Christ talked about it in Matthew 24. So right now, Jordan has control, de facto control, political control, so to speak, of Jerusalem. That was given to them in 1967. It's called the Waqf, W-A-Q-F, is the agency that controls over it. So just interesting, if Jordan gets taken over by by ISIS, this could be interesting to see how that would develop. Now, I'm not saying this will happen. ISIS could be back page news tomorrow, just like the Muslim Brotherhood is today, but I'm very concerned that may not happen. I mean, they're really, really moving right now. Matter of fact, they have terrorist organizations that are aligning with them presently. You've heard about that Boko Haram that kidnapped all those Christian gals in Nigeria. Well, that guy just joined with them, his terrorist organization. Jabhat al-Nusra in Syria, they're part of Al-Qaeda. They just joined with them. A terrorist group out of Egypt just joined with them because they represent to those Sunni Muslims the opportunity to have what they call a caliphate, an Islamic state over there that rules the whole Middle East by Sharia law out of the Quran. And there's theological differences, but they're not that vast. And they see an opportunity here with ISIS burgeoning to have what they want. So it's a very troubling situation. Now let's talk about how this plays out in modern times. Okay, Israel was desolate for 1,878 years. It becomes the nation again in 1948. But prior to that, after the Ottoman Empire collapsed in 1917, after World War I, you see that the land was divvied out again, and the Arabs got their states again. Egypt, 1922, you see Saudi Arabia and Iraq. 1932, Iran used to be called Persia, changed its name in 1935. And you see the list up there, Syria and Jordan, even in 1946. But then it was Israel's turn, and Israel was going to get this little sliver of land. And you know what it is today? That's about the size of New Jersey. Well, these Arabs that had their states already said to the Arabs that were living in what was going to be called Israel, it used to be called Palestine from 135 BC. There was Arabs there and there were Jews there. And now they're going to be calling it Israel, as per 1948. And the Arabs said, get out of there, you Arabs of Palestine, because this will not happen. We will not allow there to be a Israel. They voted against it in the United Nations. And we'll go to war. And we'll just need 5 days, and we will defeat these refugees coming out of the Holocaust. And you can go back, you Palestinian Arabs, and back, and you can take over their businesses and their neighborhoods, and you just get rid of that Jewish problem once and for all, and there will be no Israel. And that was what they said. Now, that was a terrible miscalculation. Matter of fact, there's a picture with me and General Shimon Aram. We talked at a conference in the past. He has been in 1948 war, 1967 war, 1973 war, and he always will talk about the miracles that God did in these wars. And he told me that in 1948, they had fighter jets, hundreds of thousands of troops, and they were the Arabs did, and the Israelis were just refugees. And he said, we had a few planes, private planes, Bill. We opened the cockpit, and we dropped a few hand grenades at strategic places and glass milk bottles, and they won that war, folks. And they were just refugees coming out of the Holocaust. So God is the protector of Israel. He's got Jews back in the land. Now he's got big plans for them. So now you had this Palestinian refugee crisis. That's what the amounted there, because now where are all these Palestinians, these Arabs to Palestine going to go? That's when you had the tents of Edom became a reality. There's a picture of them in 1949 as a result of that miscalculation. I believe that's the tents of Edom, the star of that prophecy. Here's who they are today. The Six-Day War in June of 1967 did not help the Palestinian refugee cause. That's when Syria, Jordan, and Egypt came against Israel, and they got defeated in 6 days. By the way, the blood moons that Mark Biltz talks about, they were in 1949 and 1950, right around the time of the 1948 war, and then the other ones on these holy days of Israel on Passover and Tabernacles were around this war in 1967 and 1968. That's why they're concerned. The ones coming up this year, concluding it, may also be involved in another Middle East war. I had dinner with Mark Biltz after the TBN show, and he said he's very concerned about Psalm 83 maybe happening or some other prophecies. So the 1967 war came, then Egypt and Jordan and Syria tried to fight again. In 1967, Israel expanded its territory, by the way, in that war. And they almost tripled their size. They got East Jerusalem, they got the Golan Heights, the Sinai, the Gaza, and the West Bank. So they won a war, and they expanded territorially, and they made their borders more defensible. And then in 1973, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria wanted to come back and get that land again, and they got defeated. So just a little bit of modern-day geopolitics. So the prophecy goes on to say, in verses 9 through 12, Asaph says, now here's what I'd like you to do about this, God, this affront, this confederacy that's trying to annihilate Israel and take over the promised land. And he says, deal with them as with Midian and with Sisera, as with Jabin at the brook of Kushan, who perished at Endor, who became as refuge of the earth. Make their nobles like Oreb and Zeb, yes, their princes like Zebah and Zalmunna, who said, let us take for ourselves the pastures of God for a possession. And that we read that earlier, they want the land. Now, I know that some of you may not know exactly what all that means, so I'm going to take a moment to explain that to you. What is he doing? He's petitioning God to go back into some historical precedent in Israel's history, and you find what he's referring to in the book of Judges, chapters 4 through 8. And before I tell you what those episodes were, I want to tell you what he's not petitioning God to do. Do you see anything up there about deal with them like you did with Pharaoh at the Red Sea in Egypt? You don't see that up there, right? I find that interesting. Now remember, at that time, which was always the big deal, the Israelis were always to remember, well, remember when God delivered our people from the bondage and the Red Seas parted and all that. That was always to be enshrined in Hebrew history because it was such a momentous, miraculous event about how God would deliver the people of Israel from bondage. But he doesn't rely on that. He doesn't call on that here. Why not? Well, remember, they were just refugees then. There was no military. There was no IDF back then. But between then and the time that Asaph writes, there is an IDF. There are episodes in Israel's history where you have an Israeli Defense Forces, and they were powerful, and they were empowered by the Lord. And that's what he's drawing our attention to here. He's saying in Judges 6 through 8, he's dealing with the Midianites. They had oppressed the Israelis for 7 years. And then, Gideon, with his 300-man army, there's maybe not quite 300 men here, and women, but if I said, look, you all, let's go fight 120,000 of our enemies right now, because that's what they went against, 120,000 Midianites, and they defeated them with a little help of the tribe of Ephraim, and it was a miracle. And God empowered them. The Israeli Defense Forces at that time happened to be a 300-man army with Gideon. And it says, deal with them like the nobles, Oreb and Zeb. Well, these were the princes that were killed by Gideon's men, and Zebah and Zalmunna were the kings killed by Gideon. So what we have here is Asaph is saying, deal with them, those oppressors, those Midianites, just like these Arabs are oppressing Israel now. Deal with them once and for all. The infantry, the leadership, the kings, the nobles, the princes, so that they can no longer oppress us ever again. And you'll never find in biblical or historical records the Midianites ever oppressing the Israelis again. They're done with. Israel took care of them in that episode with Gideon. Then he talks about another episode in Judges 4 and 5 with the Canaanites. But Jabin was the king of the Canaanites, and his general was Sisera. So we see their names in these verses 9 through 12. The Canaanites had oppressed the Israelis for 20 years. And then Deborah the prophetess told her general Barak, the Lord said that oppression is going to end once and for all. And sure enough, they went and defeated the Canaanites. The Israeli Defense Forces at that time again was empowered. And the Canaanites never oppressed the Israelites again. And I think what Asaph is saying is empower the Israeli Defense Forces today, and I'm going to show you the existing fulfillment of Bible prophecy, to defeat our Arab oppressors of Psalm 83, those around us that despise us, the reason we can't dwell securely, and that they would, from top to bottom, infantry and their leaders, so that they can never oppress us again. Okay? That's how I interpret that. And I think it's going to be a very decisive battle, and probably in the not-so-distant future. He goes on and gives more descriptions, make them like whirling dust, chaff before the wind, stubble. In other words, an entire destruction. So the Israeli Defense Forces, and I get into my book, I explain a plethora of verses, how they exist in fulfillment of Bible prophecy, but time doesn't permit me to get into all those right now. But one verse in particular, we're told in Ezekiel 37:10 that Israel is going to come out of this very horrendous condition, if you understand Ezekiel 37, where they say our bones are dry, our hope is lost, we ourselves are cut off. It's Ezekiel's dry bone vision. And it's a picture of Israel out into the nations of the world, coming to this very Holocaust-type condition where they feel hopeless. And God says that they will stand on their feet and they will become an exceedingly great army. And we see that that is what happened to Israel. They came out of a Holocaust-type condition, and now they are the #1 military force in the Middle East with approximately, we think, 200 nuclear weapons. And one nuclear weapon can take out one major city. And when you see that Damascus gets destroyed in Isaiah 17, you begin to wonder, is that a nuclear episode? Again, I write about that in my books. So as I start to wind down now, the Arabs want the land of Israel. They don't want an Israel according to this prophecy. Now, what has America been doing? Well, let's go back to the year 2000 at the Camp David Peace Summit, where Bill Clinton was trying to put Yasser Arafat together with Ehud Barak, the Prime Minister of Israel, and try to give up land for peace, trying to resolve the Arab conflict so that they'd live peaceably together. And that failed. Then George Bush tried to put the same thing together in a different format with his roadmap plan in 2013, and you see him there with the Prime Minister of Israel, Olmert at the time, and Mahmoud Abbas, and that failed as well. It seems like land for peace deals might not going to be able to work, right? Is that what we're thinking here? Apparently the presidents don't quite get it. Now we've got this other episode where we got our present president who's following the same failed footsteps, and he wants land for peace deals as well. Matter of fact, he's supporting the worst peace plan of all of them, which was initiated by the Saudis. It's the Arab Peace Initiative, which calls for Israel to give back the land they got in 1967, to give up East Jerusalem for a capital of a Palestinian state, and to allow all the refugees that are scattered around the Middle East and in the West Bank, the Palestinians and the Hamas, to come back not only into a Palestinian state, but back into the heart of Israel, because they say that was their land. Okay? Now that's not going to happen, folks. Benjamin Netanyahu is sworn against that. Of course, he's coming up for an election in about a week, so we're anxious to see the outcome of that. But so we've been practicing land for peace deals. We've been asking Israel to give up part of the promised land that God gave them in Genesis 15:18 for peace with people that won't even recognize the right for the Jewish state to exist, and who happen to be in Psalm 83, that want to cut the nation of Israel off, and if they were given the land, which is what they want, the pastures of God for themselves as a possession, and we help them get that through our presidents, they would be in a really good position to just wipe Israel off and accomplish the goal of Psalm 83, wouldn't they? But what's interesting, when the world is trying to contract Israel, Israel has been expanding. 1967 is an example. They will expand. They will expand ultimately into all that territory that God gave them, especially when you see Jesus come in the Messianic kingdom. We'll give them all that land. But I believe they're going to get some more land even before then. You might even see them take over Jordan, and I point that out in Jeremiah chapter 49. So it's interesting that land for peace deals are not working. And of course, John Kerry has tried vehemently to put peace together with the Palestinians and the Jews. That collapsed in April of 2014. Then the Palestinians went and tried to make an allegiance with the Hamas. But meanwhile, what they did in November of 2012, they went to the United Nations and they got non-member state observer status. So they're now recognized by the United Nations, much like they recognize the Vatican. Not as a country, but they're recognized as a non-member, which means they have right to the criminal courts and things like that. And they filed a petition for crimes against humanity against Israel. So you've got this issue. Now, after they achieved non-member state status, because they can't get it militarily, they keep losing wars, and the land for peace deals aren't working. Now they're trying to pursue a parallel path through the United Nations. the Palestinian Authority president, Mahmoud Abbas, came out and said, one day a young Palestinian will raise the Palestinian flag over Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the state of Palestine. How many of you ever been to Israel? Okay. Jerusalem. It's according to the Muslims, it's the third holiest city in Islam, behind Mecca and Medina. And in the Bible, it's mentioned by 70 different names over 1,000 times. You see a list of them up there. Jerusalem is listed 778 times in the Bible. City of Peace. And you see the list there. I won't go through them with you. Now, the third holiest city in Islam, Jerusalem, how many times do you think it's listed in the Quran, their Bible, their holy scriptures? You think once, twice, maybe never? It's not even listed. And they want this to fly their flag over it as the eternal capital of the Palestinian state. And the reason they believe it's significant is because the Prophet Muhammad supposedly rode through the ethereal realm on a donkey, a magic donkey, into Jerusalem. I think that donkey's dead, unless that was Balaam's donkey, talking donkey. I don't put much credence in that, nor should you. But what you should remind anybody you might know who thinks this way, especially if they happen to be part of the Arab states, is a prophecy in Zechariah 12, dealing with Jerusalem. It says, behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness, or trembling in some translations, to all the surrounding peoples, when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem. That's Zechariah 12:2. So not if they lay siege. It's going to come to a point where the surrounding peoples will lay siege. They will try to capture that area militarily, and they have been trying that since 1967 and 1973. But that's not a final fulfillment of this prophecy. So where it gets real intense for them is a few verses later. In that day when they're trying to lay siege, I will make the governors of Judah, read that as the Israeli Defense Forces, like a fire pan in the woodpile and like a fiery torch in the sheaves, and they shall devour all the surrounding peoples on the right hand and on the left, but Jerusalem shall be inhabited again in her own place. So we have a picture of a fiery torch in a woodpile, and we got some sheaves on the other hand. Now, who do you think is going to win that war? The fiery torch, right? Representative of the Israeli Defense Forces. And they're going to devour the surrounding peoples on the right hand and on the left hand. Now, does Israel have enemies surrounding them on the right hand and on the left hand? Well, they do. And they just happen to be all those reasons Israel can't dwell securely, the enemies around them that despise them, that are all in Psalm 83. So this is what my assessment of this prophecy is, folks. You are looking at Psalm 83 in living color in your generation. It's going to find a conclusion. And when they do win this war, and again, we got ISIS now in the scene, just ratcheting up the whole fervor over there. When they do win this war, they will be able to dwell securely, at least for a while. And what did it say in Ezekiel 38? Israel will be dwelling securely without walls, bars, nor gates. They'll be able to dwell securely without walls, bars, nor gates, because Psalm 83 will be foiled. This is in a nutshell. They said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation. I read that in verse 4, that the name of Israel will be remembered no more. That is the goal, because they want to take for themselves the pastures of God for a possession. What they appear to be saying here in this prophecy for our time is they don't want peace with the Jews. They don't want a two-state solution. They want peace without the Jews. They want one state, and they want to fly the flag of Palestine over that state. That's the goal of Psalm 83. And what is our president trying to do? Put them in a better position to get that land. They think that they're dealing with rational people, but these people will not even recognize Israel's right to exist. So I asked you some questions in the beginning as we laid out Psalm 83 and Ezekiel 38 and tried to present the case for sequencing them and to see if Ezekiel 38 is really ready to happen yet. As you can tell, I believe Psalm 83 will happen first. And when Israel wins that war against their Arab enemies, they will be able to dwell securely. And I do believe they will take even more territory, like they did in 1967, like Joshua did 3,300 years ago, and like King David did 3,000 years ago. When they win a war, they take land. And that land makes their borders more defensible. And Israel is very concerned about dwelling securely and having defensible borders. So remember the example I showed. Didn't it seem odd that Russia would want such a big coalition to come against little tiny Israel today? as we look at little Israel today. If this was going to happen and Russia was going to put this together right now, it would seem really odd that they'd want to put all this big allegiance together. It would be like them trying to come against Israel. So like I said, Obama saying New Jersey is not complying with our health care. Let's get Canada, the United States, and Mexico to come against New Jersey. Overkill, seems really ridiculous. But let's say the Bible Belt comes along in the mid part of America over to the East Coast and says, you know, we don't need Mexico. They got cartels there. They're a little bit scary. They're kidnapping people. They got drugs. We don't need Canada. You know, we can take out New Jersey. Come on, it's just a little state over there. Our 30 states, we could take out that little teeny state. And let's say that they convinced Obama that was the case. I'm just using the parallel with the Middle East scenario here. And let's say that they went to war and New Jersey won and started to expand territorially and take over the police departments and the nuclear arsenals that existed in those other states. And that's what I believe Israel will start to do. Not that there's nuclear arsenals in the Arab states, but then do you think they might need Canada and Mexico if that happened? Folks, Israel is very powerful right now. So we asked some questions. Why do they have different enemies? Because they're a different prophecy. Why do they have different defeats? Because they're a different prophecy. Why do they have different motives? The land versus the plunder and booty? Different prophecies. I don't believe Ezekiel 38 will happen until Psalm 83 happens for the various reasons that I've just stated. Now, I'm going to give you another thing to think about here. America. Remember, we were in Ezekiel 38 going, Russia, what are you doing? If that's us, the young lions of Tarshish. What are you doing, Russia? Are you coming after this very wealthy Israel that's dwelling securely, that has probably just won a war in Psalm 83, defeated their Arab enemies, and we want to have a relationship with them, a merchandise relationship with them? Let's assume that we seem to be protesters there, and Psalm 83 was probably happened. Now, what about if the rapture had happened? Because, folks, I believe the rapture could happen very soon. I'm a pre-trib rapture believer, which means I believe Jesus could come to get his bride who's not appointed to wrath before the tribulation period. Matter of fact, I'm so pre-trib, I don't even buy Post Toasties or green bananas. So I'm looking for Jesus to come at any given moment. Now, it's very possible, and some of us believe, although we can't say for sure, that the church may not be here for Ezekiel 38 and 39, because that is all about Israel. God's going to uphold his holy name in the midst of his people Israel, it says in Ezekiel 39:7. There's a chance that we will be simply protesters as a result of the rapture or whatever other judgment may come upon this country. We're concerned this country is under judgment at this point in time because of what we're doing. We've kicked God out of our culture. As John was talking about, we can't define the constitutionality of DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, where one man is married to one woman, homosexuality, things like that, our treatment of Israel. I just want you to say now, if there was a rapture and Israel's expanding and they're very strong after Psalm 83, how many Muslims would be raptured? Because remember, the armies of Psalm 83 and Ezekiel 38 are predominantly Muslim. Matter of fact, Ezekiel 38 is all Muslim except for Russia. So how many Muslims are going to be raptured? None. Because you have to believe you have to be saved and be part of the bride of Christ and confess with your lips that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that he was raised from the dead and receive him as your Savior. But they're worshiping Allah. So can you imagine that? America's diminished and Russia's army is huge, fully intact. Western armies would be fragmented if the rapture happened. And Israel would be a sitting duck for Russia to come after them. And the Israeli Defense Forces don't stop Russia. It's God himself that has to stop them. America can't stop them. Russia's going to get to a point with this coalition where they're so formidable that no one can stop them. That appears to be what we have here. So as we conclude with the last verse, Asaph says, fill their faces with shame, referring to these Arabs that want to destroy Israel, and that the name be remembered no more, that they may seek your name, O Lord. Let them be confounded and dismayed forever. Just let them be put to shame and perish. But why? That they may know that you, whose name alone is the Lord, are the most high over all the earth. Do they know that right now? No, they worship Allah, right? And Islam and Christianity is not the same. So there will be remnants out of the Psalm 83 countries. Egypt will have a remnant that gets it. Assyria, actually Iran will. I'll point that out as well. But he's saying that they'll go through this for the purpose that maybe someday a remnant will know that there is one true God, and it's not the one they're worshiping presently. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, do we know that one true God? Do you all know that one true God right now? We're told in Romans 1 that since the beginning of time, God's invisible attributes are clearly seen inside of the creation, His Godhead, His power, so that men are without excuse. That even in the creation, we are to know that there's a God, that there's a Creator, and that there's no excuse not to recognize that. That's what Romans 1 says. Now you see a picture up there painted by Lyle Trimmer. Can you dim the lights, or is that going to be hard to do right now? It's a little better effect if we can do it. Now, Lyle Trimmer painted a picture of King David reading the book of Psalms. That's Psalm 1, verses 1 through 3. And do you see Jesus in the creation looking at David there? I see a few heads going like this. Okay. Well, I'm going to give those heads that are, those of you that look like you're looking like deers in the headlights, I'm going to give you a clue. Do you see his beard? Do you see his hair in the trees? Do you see his eyebrows? Do you see the Holy Spirit represented as the dove in the tree over there? In the creation, God can be seen. He knows the number of hairs on our head. He holds our tears in a bottle. He loves us. He is reaching out in the Middle East, and you can hear stories tomorrow that will just blow you away when I teach about the miracles and the healings and the dreams and the visions that are causing multitudes of Muslims who are oppressed in Syrian refugee camps in Iran to come to know Jesus Christ. That's how deep we are into the final times, folks, right now. So I'm going to take away the clues, because I hope you know Jesus and don't need clues anymore. And I thank you very much, and I look forward to speaking with you and the group all tomorrow. Thank you.
Watching live via the live stream. Again, tomorrow morning we'll be here at 10 o'clock, and then we'll also be back tomorrow night 6 o'clock, then Sunday morning 8:15, 9:45, 11, and 6 p.m. on Sunday night. I encourage you to come back. I promise you, you'll get more information. You probably feel like you've been drinking from a fire hose tonight, but I promise you the information you get will be beneficial for you, valuable for you, and it'll help you to see biblical prophecy and the things that are going on in our world unlike you've ever seen it before. And so let's stand together. All right, stand up. Look at somebody next to you and say, that's pretty good. Those guys are pretty smart, aren't they, after all? All right, well, let's pray. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for our time together. Thank you for the presenters tonight. Thank you for Bill and his presentation of Psalm 83, Ezekiel 38. And Lord, thank you also for John and exposing the apostasy and the deception even in the church today. We look forward for our time together tomorrow at 10 o'clock. In the name of Jesus we pray. And all God's people said? Amen. Amen. All right, God bless you. See you in the morning, 10 o'clock.